Colleges, universities, they play a major role in the formation of society, of our children, of our future. And yet there's a purging taking place in our universities and our colleges across the United States. We're going to talk about a specific example of a professor that was wrongfully terminated and why this case is so important in the struggle for religious freedom and proper open marketplace of ideas for our public universities and colleges. But before we get to that in the second half of the show, I want to have a discussion here with an individual, a staff representative of K-Wave, Matt Johnson. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brad.
Now, Matt, K-Wave, KWVE, has played a very important role in the Dacus report from the beginning. We started off on this station, and then it was syndicated out, and now it's heard on over 170 stations across the country. Even before that, we had The Legal Edge, which is a commentary, a 30-second and 60-second commentary. It's heard Monday through Friday. We started off just one day a week. Now it's heard on over 500 stations across the country, Monday through Friday. In fact, that was Pastor Chuck Smith's idea. That wasn't even my idea. He suggested, I said, sounds good. So it's been exciting to see the partnership that we've had with K-Wave over the years as we continue to get out this information to help people and people of faith. But as we look at the situation, the landscape, if you will, moving forward, we have serious concerns with regards to the future liberty and freedom of Christian radio stations like K-Wave. Like there's the fairness doctrine that's being pushed from the far left that could actually threaten the ability for Christian stations to be able to do what God's called them to do, and instead have to put on people from different beliefs, different faiths. I mean, what would you guys do? Have you ever thought about what you guys would do if suddenly a law was passed that ordered you guys to have people on pushing different beliefs and than the Christian faith and different religions and different worldviews? That'd be a pretty big burden, wouldn't it?
It would. I think the first thing we would do would be to go to Lord in prayer and ask for His grace and mercy upon us. And I think that actually the second thing we would do is give Brad Dacus a call at the Pacific Justice Institute to see how we can make sure that our gospel message continues to go out. Luckily for K-Wave and our network of radio stations in particular, we're a ministry of Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa. So we're under a little bit of a different umbrella than a traditional independent radio network that might be doing Christian programming. So because we are a ministry of the church first and foremost, our message is the love and gospel of Jesus Christ. And one of the things that we exist to do is to promote not only the gospel, but also good, solid Bible teaching and Christ-centered ministries like Pacific Justice. And we are very grateful for our partnership with you, by the way. And we love having you here, and we are very excited to produce your program. And we're excited not only for our own benefit, but the fact that you said 170 stations across the nation, that 170 stations get to hear the work that Pacific Justice is doing for churches and other organizations.
Yeah, there's such a challenge out there to get out the information. And so that's why we're concerned in the future about Christian radio stations with potentially new laws coming in, or new legislation like the Fairness Doctrine, which could really be everything but fair, actually very persecuting in nature with regards to stations like this. We had a case not that long ago that, in fact, I understand it's on appeal potentially, dealing with a Christian radio station in Peffer, Wisconsin. And it's a wonderful Christian radio station. In fact, they air our programming. But here's what happened. The town of Dacus passed an ordinance. It was a public accommodation, that they passed. And what this was supposed to do was, what it did was it was going to order churches and this Christian radio station not to discriminate in their hiring against same-sex marriage and these kinds of activities. Well, if you have a Christian radio station or a church and they have beliefs about what's right and what pleases God and what doesn't please God, they should be able to carry out their faith. They shouldn't have to compromise in order to keep their airwaves moving or to be able to have their church open on Sunday morning. So we at Pacific Justice stepped in, we represented them, we filed a lawsuit, and we won. And it's really important because if we hadn't, I think we're going to see, in fact, we still may see other cities across the country trying to have these kind of intimidating and encroaching policies against stations like K-Wave. Now, let me ask you something else also I think it's important now, because you said that your station is one that is actually under a church, Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa, correct?
Yes, we are a ministry of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.
Okay, because there's a lot of stations out there that are nonprofit ministries that are not a part and under a church.
Right. They stand alone. They might be something that is funded by listeners, like a pledge drive based, or they might have advertising or brokered programming, which programmers would pay to be on it. But they may not be affiliated with a particular church or nonprofit in that sense.
Right. And folks, if you're listening to this broadcast on a station, there's a good chance it's going to fall into one of those two categories, either under a church or an independent nonprofit. And I have a couple of points to make here. First is the fact that we at Pacific Justice Institute, we're actively, supporting and encouraging people to support these stations. They need local support oftentimes to be able to do what they're doing. So, if you like this program, you like the other programs that you're listening to, I encourage you to give back to those nonprofit Christian stations that are engaging in ministry, and those that are part of a church. Once again, they're under the umbrella of a church, and churches are also nonprofit. So I encourage you to when there's these funding drives or different things that they're doing, be a part of it, get involved in it. Also, if there's events taking place.
Right. So one thing that K-Wave likes to describe itself, and I would assume that most radio stations who are gospel-centered Christian radio stations would like to describe themselves as, is we tell churches and ministries that we are their best friend with a megaphone. It's something, like I said earlier, we like to do for Pacific Justice, is we want to promote not necessarily our own personalities or talent that we have on the station, but to give a vehicle for churches and other good Christian organizations who have a heart for reaching people for the Lord Jesus and defending our religious liberties, like the Dacus Report, in order for them to be heard and to reach people in some of the most intimate parts of their life. For example, in your car, your kitchen, your office, wherever people listen, we have an opportunity to tell them that Jesus loves them. And not only does Jesus love them, but maybe you could consider this church or nonprofit or ministry organization for you or your family as well.
Yeah, and so it really goes both ways. You guys are so gracious in promoting so many ministries, but I want people also to recognize that graciousness and be supportive and get behind those Christian stations out there, either under a church or nonprofit ministries that are doing this great work. I think that's so important. Also, you guys sponsor events at times?
We do. We have a few events for families, and for specifically for Pacific Justice, we come alongside and help produce galas and other things that you guys will be doing.
Yes, our Celebration of Justice event. That's true. You guys are active participants. You may be saying to yourself, well, I don't have a lot of financial support that I can give to a Christian station or the station I'm listening to this broadcast on, but folks, they may be having an event that they're engaged in, like K-Wave is, and you can get involved in helping to participate in that event, getting out that information, forwarding that on. As these stations try to reach out to their community, this is something you can do as well. Something else we also have, Matt, I think it's really important, is we have model policies to help protect stations like yours and like the one you're listening to right now, folks, where they could be sued. There's a greater and greater offenses against them, like we saw in Wisconsin recently, like I just mentioned earlier. But yet churches, ministries, Christian radio stations can take solid actions to help protect themselves against these lawsuits. And we've put up these model policies, these model bylaws that can be adopted and will actually help protect them from such litigation. So if you're listening to this, you're thinking, gosh, maybe my church doesn't have these policies or bylaws. Maybe my Christian radio station doesn't have these things. Feel free to contact Pacific Justice Institute. We'd love to provide these without charge. All of our work is without charge, and to really make a difference.
And that is so important, too, to recognize that there are resources that if you are working in a church or a ministry organization and you're realizing, you know what, we really should take another look, that there are places like Pacific Justice that are able to come alongside and help you and give you good information of how to retool some things that might need to be relooked at.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it just reminded we actually have some other great resources, for example, the book Reclaim Your School to help youth ministries to help train them on all the different ways they can evangelize public schools, training videos for business owners called Faith in the Workplace, how they can legally evangelize their employees, their customers, their community, how they can partner with churches and ministries. We have an article, a real important article, 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from Being Taken by Child Protective Services or social workers. Very important. Opt-out forms parents can use to help protect their kids, just to name a few. So thank you for that wonderful reminder, Matt. If you want that information, go to our website, pacificjustice.org, or you can go to pji.org. That's P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org, pji.org. And once again, get involved. Support your Christian stations out there. They're doing a great work. If getting out the gospel is important, if they're having an impact on your life, if you see them having an impact on other lives, don't just say, oh, well, that's a nice thing. Recognize they have bills to pay, get behind them and support them, and prayerfully support them as well. And
I think that's the key too, Brad, is above all else, we want prayers. We want to make sure that we are being led by the Lord Jesus and proclaiming his message to a world that really needs it, particularly here at K-Wave and on the station that you're listening to as well, is that any Christ-centered station, their primary purpose for existence is to get the gospel out and tell people in their local areas, you know what, Jesus loves you, and that's why we exist.
Right. And when you hear programming that is Bible centered and is solid and is not going off on some weird doctrine, let them know you appreciate that and get behind them, because we need to preserve the airwaves for the truth and for the gospel and for the Bible.
You want to know something kind of cool, Brad? The first radio broadcast ever in the United States was a church service. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, that was the first one. It was out east. I'm forgetting which state, but it was in the 20s. And the first thing they did was they took a microphone into a church and recorded, and that was the first thing sent over airwaves in the United States. So this radio station is continuing that legacy of proclaiming Christ Jesus over the airwaves, and we are so blessed to be able to do so.
Well, thank you, and it's our pleasure to do so. And keep up the great work, Matt.
My name is Eric Thompson. I'm a father of 8. We live in Hemet, California. It's real nice out here, nice and quiet, not much going on. I like to play guitar and bake bread in my free time. My experience at Moreno Valley College was largely positive. I was hired in 2005, and I really had a great time as a professor there teaching sociology. I like sociology because it's the study of human beings and human behavior and the study of society itself, its changes. The administration had, previous to this, had a problem with my showing a film called Understanding Same-Sex Attraction. This video gives the testimony of 4 or 5 men who they got therapy, and they were actually able to see themselves attracted to someone of the opposite sex. I presented both sides of the issue. Is it biological? Is it social? The nature-nurture debate. After the 2014 investigation, there was another investigation in 2015. The Supreme Court was deliberating on the very important Obergefell decision regarding same-sex marriage. In class in 2015, we had a great discussion about this subject. And it largely went well, except for a student of mine, an older student of mine, who objected and eventually left the room. She went to the president of the college, went to several faculty and complained. She thought all along, by even discussing Obergefell, we were treading on thin ice in her mind, and she became very offended at our even discussing the topic. And I take a neutral stand when it comes to these sensitive issues, because when we're trying to tease out in their minds what they really believe, it's not good. It's not helpful for me to jump in and say, well, this is what I believe. I was investigated a third time, and that was because of a grade I gave a student. I gave her a D. And she complained that it was because that I thought she was a lesbian, and I didn't even know her identity, her status. Well, I wrote her a letter, emailed her, stating I didn't know she was a lesbian, and wished her well, etc., and asked her if she would reconsider. I also gave a copy to the administration. The administration had me in their office and confiscated my office keys and had me get a few things from my office and escorted me off campus with 2 police officers because they claimed that I had violated an order not to contact the student, which they never gave me. When I got the notice of intent to terminate, I contacted Pacific Justice Institute, Michael Peffer, and he was great. He understood my position, my situation, and he went right to work to help me to sort of get untangled from the mess the district had put me in. Michael wrote a great closing brief, and he was so effective that we, in October, found out that we had won arbitration, and I was granted my job back. So I'm very grateful to PJI, to Michael Peffer. They're an excellent organization, excellent team, and they really stand for justice.
Professor Eric Thompson was fired for doing his job. He was a master about inspiring discussion in a sociology class about important issues. This professor was unjustly treated by the administration, and that's why we at Pacific Justice Institute stepped in. We were honored to represent such an outstanding professor without charge. If you know of someone in a similar situation, have them contact Pacific Justice Institute. We're here to help. And folks, if you'd like to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, just go to our website, pacificjustice.org, pacificjustice.org. And there you can sign up to get our case updates, our press releases. That's our Legal Insider. It goes out every week. And then you can also look at our other resources we have as well. For example, the Constitution on Campus, an important guide to help college students on public universities, on campuses, know their rights to live their faith and share their faith. So go to our website, pacificjustice.org, or the shorter website you could go to, a little easier, is pji.org. P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute.org. Now, we have with us here in the studio the director of the Southern California office for Pacific Justice Institute, Michael Peffer. Michael, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Brad.
Now, Michael, you've been engaged in a very important case dealing with a public college, public university, involving a professor who was wrongfully fired simply because he decided to give both sides, both perspectives, on the issue of same-sex marriage when it was pending before the United States Supreme Court. Give us a little bit of a background on the facts, and then I want you to give an update on this case, because this is a very, very important case that we at Pacific Justice Institute have taken on.
Yes, and we have been for a fair amount of time, a couple of years, 2.5 years, I think we've been helping Mr. Thompson. And really, as I said, I recently had a brief, and we'll talk about that in a second, that I wrote. And one of my opening lines were, make no mistake about it, this case is about communicating ideas that are controversial. And that's really what this comes down to. We've got a guy, 11 years, well regarded, but he was a professor for 11 years. He's tenured. He's well regarded. His most recent student faculty review was all blazing great remarks, and so the guy's a good guy, and basically he teaches sociology, so issues that are important to family and other social institutions, which that's what sociology is, are germane to the topic. And in this case, it first began while the Obergefell case was being argued to the Supreme Court, the case that ended up legalizing same-sex marriage. But he was talking about ideas. Is this a good thing? Should we go this direction? What happens if we take this thinking to its logical extreme? That's really what he was doing with his class. He was not attacking anybody. He was talking about ideas, not you're like this, and you're like that. That wouldn't be right. He was talking about ideas.
Now, lo and behold, this is a public college, a junior college, Moreno Valley Community College. Public schools, public colleges in particular, they're supposed to be about promoting critical thinking, about ideas. They're supposed to be the open marketplace of ideas. Yes. And yet, because he was doing his job, he was punished for that.
That's right, and that's exactly right. In fact, the cases from the United States Supreme Court on down, even to our liberal Ninth Circuit here, they have established that academic freedom, that is, the freedom to have exchange of ideas in the classroom, is critical to the collegiate education. It's critical. It's not something we can just easily dispense of without, the cases have said, without directly harming the educational system.
Yeah, I think we've got to look at it, both the micro and the macro. Micro, this is a terrible injustice to this professor doing a great job. The macro, this is a trend, Michael, that I think we're seeing across the country. Universities becoming McCarthyistic, if you will, or witch hunt minded. When you don't have the right perspective, then they're going to boot you out, irrespective of the critical thinking, promoting critical thinking over marketplace of ideas. We had something that I saw happen up in Harvard recently, where a professor who was there at the university, and with regard to the law school, he's an attorney, professor, very sensitive to civil rights. He's an African American. Him and his wife, both sharp in their legal professions, and yet he was fired from Harvard. And the reason was because he was taking a case in criminal defense of a controversial person, Mr. Harvey Weinstein, and because some students said, "Oh no, you shouldn't defend that man," he was fired. Yes. Well, I'm not a Harvey Weinstein fan, okay? Obviously. But you know what? I am a fan of justice. I'm a fan of due process, equal protection under the law. Yes. And when we have a university, a law school like Harvard, throwing that away in the name of far left appeasement and an agenda, I have serious concern about that, because Harvard Law School, they should know by now about this. Alan Dershowitz, one of their professors or former professors at Harvard, respected, very highly respected. He's known as a liberal, if you will. Mm-hmm. But he also is someone who appreciates due process. He appreciates criminal defense, appreciates justice. And he's come out and condemned Harvard for this. Unfortunately, Michael, my perspective is Harvard's they're not alone. We see this same kind of purging taking place, keeping people from speaking at colleges, outsiders coming in. There's countless numbers of cases of universities engaging these tactics, purging faculty, silencing students, silencing speakers. That's why I think it's so important that we took on this case defending Professor Eric Thompson, because it's not just about him. It's about a much bigger attempt to purge ideas, philosophy, thought, critical thinking from our public universities and campuses.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I happen to teach a few classes at a law school here, Trinity Law School, and I train my students. I want them to look at both sides of the story. That's what we want. We want lawyers to be able to look at both sides. It not only strengthens your argument, but it helps you to deal with the other side's argument as well. And for here, the same thing with Professor Thompson. Look, these folks need to know whether or not they tend to agree with it, or they hate it, or they detest it. They need to know the other side of the argument. And this constant catastrophizing of oh my gosh, this is the end. Oh, he said this and he said that. That is very weakening for people. And that's the problem with this. The courts have long held that academic freedom is necessary for the strengthening of the students. That's what's necessary, to challenge their ideas, to make them uncomfortable. And Professor Thompson, he was doing that. And reasonable people might disagree with how he did that, but that's what the classroom is for.
Right.
And that's what's happening here.
Yeah, there's no name calling. There was no attacking anyone. He was simply making sure that critical thinking was taking place. Both perspectives were being presented, and yet he was fired for that. Now, you took on this case, Michael. You did a great job, and you won.
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing. We went to arbitration, which is a trial, basically. We put on a trial, went for 6 days, and he had been terminated. And the arbitrator reversed the termination, said that there's no conduct that was worthy of a termination. He did give Professor Thompson a penalty, but look, we were accepting of that simply because it was drastically different than termination. But the school district could not live with that. They filed an appeal to that, and we're dealing with that appeal. We just put in our brief, our response to their appeal of this, and we're arguing that the arbitrator did the correct job for the correct reasons, and it was consistent with the evidence. And,
right. Now, and I know arbitrators in arbitration rarely give 100% for one side or the other. So the fact there was a little nick over here on our client's side, is not a big surprise necessarily. They're trying to, split it. But the big picture is he got his job back.
That's right.
They said he was wrongfully terminated. No ifs, ands, or buts.
That's
wrongfully terminated. He got his job back.
Yes.
They saw the injustice in the arbitration process of what had happened to him. That's the big takeaway. And yet they didn't say, Moreno Valley Community College didn't say, oh, you're right. Here we have an intelligent, educated third-party arbitrator showing us how we're wrong. No, they said, we're going to appeal this. So they're appealing us. We're defending him in the appellate process. What are we looking at time-wise? What are we looking at as we move ahead on this very important case?
Yes, we should have an answer from the present motion work that we're doing right now in late July of 2019. And the important thing is too, and maybe this is the reason why they're appealing, is that we got our client back pay, back benefits that was awarded to our client for all this time that he's been off, and he's been off for well in excess of a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so maybe they're worried about that, and they don't want to pay that. But you know what? The arbitrator got this right. The arbitrator got the fact that these guys were being this district, far more overzealous and far less protective of communication within the classroom.
Yeah. Well, it's an important case, and I hope people will be keeping this in their prayers. And folks, if you're hearing this case now, maybe this is the first time you've heard about this case. Perhaps you're thinking, "Gosh, this is terrible. What can I do?" Well, one thing I want you to be praying for our client, Professor Eric Thompson. He's a great guy, but he's under attack. And had we at Pacific Justice not defended him, he would not have been defended. He'd be out of a job simply because he was faithful and true to have integrity in his professing as a professor and teaching. And we at Pacific Justice Institute went to bat, took a lot of hours. I want you to be praying for him. I also want you to be praying for Pacific Justice Institute and Michael Peffer as he continues the defense. Michael's one of our full-time attorneys here on staff at Pacific Justice Institute. And finally, if you're out there and you have a situation where you think you've been wrongfully terminated because of your faith, because of your beliefs, whether you're a professor, a teacher, whatever it may be, perhaps want your union is not being accommodated of you, and you want your union dues to go to a ministry or charity instead of a union, whatever it may be, contact us at Pacific Justice Institute. We have attorneys all throughout the United States defending people without charge, and we don't just take on the high-profile cases. We're very unique. We make sure everyone gets help. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.